On the morning of June 26, 2023, Fred Wiggington called the Amherst County Sheriff's Office to report his wife, Elsie, missing. He claimed she packed a bag in the middle of the night, took off her wedding ring, placed it next to her cell phone, and then left voluntarily, never to be seen alive again. Immediately, people were suspicious of the story because they knew Elsie, and that wasn't like her at all. Elsie was born on April 20th, 1978, in Richmond and grew up as a foster child in Amherst County, Virginia. She'd worked nearly 30 years as a nurse, and at the time of her disappearance was the director of nursing at Fairmont Crossing. She was described as a very dependable person who was deeply committed to her patients, her career, and her family. Her first marriage was to Troy Rucker, and they had 2 children together. After divorcing, she married Frederick Wiggington in 2019, but it quickly turned volatile, and by June 20th, she filed for divorce, citing Fred's alleged adultery with his ex-wife, Patricia. She also accused him of various financial crimes. However, she changed her mind, and the divorce case was dismissed. By 2023, she was once again at the point of leaving and was making plans to move to Maryland to live with her sister. Tragically, she'd never get the chance. On Friday, June 23, 2023, she confided in her foster sister, Tracy Coleman, through text messages that she thought Fred was going to kill her. In the same message, she also shared her plans to move to Baltimore, Maryland. That evening, their neighbor, John Goff, witnessed Elsie and Fred standing outside their home together. He noted that they appeared to be talking, but there was no obvious sign of a violent struggle or a heated argument. However, after going back inside, Elsie was never seen alive again. 2 days later, on Sunday, June 25th, Elsie's daughter, Sativa, texted her asking for a recipe. While she received a response, it wasn't actually the family's secret recipe, but a generic one. Because Elsie knew the actual recipe by heart and would have never sent a generic one, her family believed Fred had sent the message. Also, Elsie was known for being articulate and using proper grammar, but the messages contained typos and a shorthand style that matched more to Fred's texting habits. The message also read that she was leaving everything behind and starting over with another man. Sativa was suspicious and called her mother, but whoever had the phone refused to answer and just kept texting. Interestingly, at the time the texts were coming from Elsie's phone, Fred claimed she was already gone, even though the phone's location showed it was still at their house on Pendleton Drive. When she was initially reported missing, authorities believed Fred's story that she left voluntarily and didn't start a full investigation until months later. In early 2024, Sheriff Jimmy Ayers took office, and unlike the previous sheriff's departments, he made finding Elsie their top priority. By March, Fred was telling potential employers and coworkers that Elsie had been murdered and her body was found under a pier in Virginia Beach. He even told them he had to travel to Virginia Beach to identify her body. However, one coworker noted that Fred smirked while telling the story as if it were a joke, before following up with a false claim that she had previously left him and stolen $50,000 from his bank account. Throughout the summer, investigators interviewed dozens of witnesses and executed a book full of search warrants. They also followed tips from coworkers and ex-boyfriends, including some who claimed to have seen Elsie as late as fall 2023, but those leads were ultimately debunked. In July, investigators began to directly question Fred and his ex-wife, Patricia, who'd moved into the home after Elsie disappeared. We're not talking about a couple of months after she disappeared, but more like 24 to 48 hours later. This was suspicious, especially considering Fred had been cheating on Elsie with Patricia. On July 9th, 2024, investigators executed their first search warrant on Fred's property on Pendleton Drive. During the 10 to 12-hour search, cadaver dogs alerted to several areas, which led them to find a concrete slab behind a trailer. It was at this time that Sheriff Ayers stated he no longer believed Elsie was alive. Unfortunately, they needed a second search warrant to physically dig up and remove the concrete slab. On August 14th, with the second warrant now in hand, investigators returned to the property and removed the 6-inch thick concrete slab measuring 6 by 4 feet. They then dug 2 feet down and discovered Elsie's remains, wrapped in a blue tarp and tied with a cord. She was still wearing the white shirt that the neighbors saw her in on the day she disappeared. Fred was quickly located and arrested the same day. He was initially charged with concealment of a dead body, but after the medical examiner determined her death was due to a gunshot wound to the back of the head, his charges were upgraded to first-degree murder. While in jail, he told another inmate that he planned to frame Elsie's brother for her murder because he'd recently been released from prison. The inmate also claimed Fred showed no remorse and actually bragged about murdering Elsie and had expressed a desire to be featured on the TV show Dateline. After months of maintaining she knew nothing about Elsie's disappearance, Patricia came clean on August 19, 2024, 5 days after Elsie's remains were discovered. She revealed that in August 2023, Fred confessed to her during a heated argument that he had in fact killed Elsie. She added that he had admitted to burying her body under a concrete slab on the property. She also said that during an argument between them, he'd warned her by saying, and I quote, "You should have seen Elsie's face." A little over a year later, in January 2025, Patricia was arrested and charged with accessory after the fact and obstruction of justice. She was also placed on a strict no-contact order with Fred. While in jail, Fred bragged about a photo that investigators found on his phone that was taken the same weekend as Elsie disappeared and showed the firearm later used in the murder. He referred to the images as a souvenir picture. On May 2, 2025, after a 3-day trial, Fred was found guilty of first-degree murder, use of a firearm in the commission of a felony, and on July 30th, he was sentenced to life in prison plus 3 years. As of April 2026, Patricia remains out on a $2,500 bond as her case progresses through the Amherst County High Court system. On the night of August 11, 2016, in Alpine, Texas, 21-year-old Zuzu Verk went to her boyfriend Robert Fabian's apartment for what was supposed to be a quiet evening together. But after stepping inside, she was never seen alive again. Robert's explanation? He walked her out to her car and watched her drive away. But investigators smelled BS from a mile away. Zuzu Renee Verk was born on April 22, 1995, in Dallas, Texas, and was raised in Keller. She was described as an outgoing and energetic individual who loved the outdoors and was deeply connected to her family. By 2016, Zuzu was a junior at Sul Ross State University in Alpine, Texas, studying biology. That same year, she met Robert Fabian during a night out, and the two quickly hit it off. On the surface, he appeared to be a fun and socially active individual, but as friends and family got to know him, they saw a completely different side. Behind the fun, social exterior was a vain, arrogant, and selfish individual. Zuzu's best friend, Andriana, said that when they all hung out together for Zuzu's 21st birthday, Robert spent much of the time pouting and not even socializing. Her family also noticed that behind closed doors, he was an extremely jealous and possessive individual who often left Zuzu in tears. By October of that year, they were in an on-again, off-again cycle, with Zuzu having told her mother she knew she wasn't going to spend the rest of her life with him. She'd even secretly applied to transfer to Texas A&M for her senior year in order to get away from him. On October 10th, just 24 hours before she disappeared, Zuzu called her mother, Lori, and explicitly said she was going to tell Robert about her plans to transfer. According to her mother, Zuzu was going to use this as a way to officially end the relationship once and for all. Unbeknownst to her, Robert was already suspicious of her plan. A friend of his would say that leading up to Zuzu's disappearance, Robert had consumed himself with the idea. On the evening of the 11th, Zuzu went to Robert's apartment and sent her friend a video that she had recorded of herself walking into his apartment and discovering little candles in a heart that says, "I love you, Zuzu," next to a bottle of champagne on ice. Her friend replied that if she was dating Robert again, she was going to kill her and that she needed to text her back immediately. Sadly, that reply would never come. At some point during the night, neighbors reported hearing a loud and heated argument coming from inside. The voices were intense enough to be heard through the walls, and at least one neighbor later told investigators they heard a loud thump during the altercation. Shortly after, audio from a movie began playing at a high volume, something investigators would later believe was used to cover up what had just happened. Within 24 hours, Zuzu's family had grown concerned after she missed her midterms and was not answering her phone. After her father, Glenn, spoke with Robert, who claimed she had left his apartment earlier that morning, he called the police and reported her missing. Meanwhile, neighbors reported seeing Robert scrubbing his apartment floor with bleach and carrying out large trash bags. He was also seen taking his laundry to a local laundromat, which was highly unusual behavior for a college student on a Wednesday morning. Then at 10:15 p.m., surveillance cameras captured Robert and his friend, Chris Estrada, at a Dollar General, purchasing 3 heavy-duty plastic drop cloths using Estrada's credit card. 2 days later, on the morning of Friday, October 14th, Robert was first questioned by investigators and gave conflicting accounts of his movements. At one point, he claimed he left the apartment around 3 a.m. and went to Dairy Queen to, and I quote, ponder his future. He later reverted to a different version, telling investigators he'd simply walked Zuzu to her car and watched her leave, but the physical evidence didn't support that claim. First off, he said she left at 1 a.m., but between 3 and 4, his neighbor heard loud noises coming from his apartment and went to check. That's when he saw Robert leaving and Zuzu's car still there. Also, when they found her car, the driver's seat had been pushed back much further than Zuzu would have sat, giving her petite size. The position of the seat suggested that someone taller, like Robert, had driven it at some point. During that same interview, investigators noticed something that stood out. Robert was repeatedly referring to Zuzu in the past tense. It happened more than once, and to them, the choice of words raised an immediate red flag. After the first interview, Robert returned that same afternoon for a second one. This time, he went into more detail about the volatile nature of their relationship, describing it as a roller coaster and claiming that Zuzu had recently told him she was, and I quote, drifting away. When investigators searched his apartment, they noticed it was oddly clean, except for the kitchen. While the rest of the unit looked scrubbed, the remains of their romantic dinner were still sitting on plates, and the sink was full of dirty dishes. But most notable was the lack of sheets and bed covers on Robert's bed. A neighbor would later testify that they went to do their own laundry on the morning of October 12th and found Robert's sheets, a mattress pad, and clothes already in the apartment complex's washer and dryer. It's believed that instead of returning them to his bed, he disposed of them. Also during the search, they discovered painter's drop cloths that they would later find were consistent with the ones bought at Dollar General. 2 days after the interviews, Robert lawyered up and refused to answer any more questions after investigators had basically poked holes in his story. Estrada would later say that Robert felt attacked once police began challenging his version of events. As they continued investigating Robert, they learned he had borrowed a Ford F-150 from his brother-in-law around the time Zuzu's body was believed to have been moved from the apartment. That truck became a critical piece of evidence in the case, as soil and other materials found in the bed were consistent with the area where Zuzu's remains would later be discovered. Investigators also learned of Estrada's involvement from his friend Brittany Gasca. She had heard about Zuzu's disappearance and called the police to tell them that Estrada had visited her house on the night of the 12th, looking unnerved like he had seen a ghost. When she asked if the situation was newsworthy, he replied, "If it is newsworthy, I didn't do anything." Once investigators had his name and the surveillance footage from Dollar General, they were able to connect him to the case. However, just like Robert, when he was brought in for questioning, he gave conflicting accounts. He also suggested that the police were inventing evidence against Robert. While investigators were sure they had their suspects and that Zuzu was likely dead, they still needed to find her remains, but that would take months. Finally, on February 3, 2017, a U.S. Border Patrol agent discovered her skeletal remains in a shallow grave near Sunny Glen Canyon, just outside Alpine. The remains were wrapped in plastic, consistent with the drop cloths that Robert and Estrada had purchased at the Dollar General. Due to the condition, medical examiners could not determine an exact cause of death, but ruled the manner of death homicide. A day after Zuzu's remains were discovered, on February 4, 2017, Robert was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, tampering with or fabricating physical evidence by concealing a human corpse. A couple of weeks earlier, Estrada was arrested for driving while intoxicated and evading arrest. 2 days after Robert's arrest, Estrada was arrested again by the Phoenix Police Department in Arizona and was charged with tampering with or fabricating physical evidence by concealing a human corpse. He was then extradited back to Texas. When investigators searched his Ford Mustang, they found a blonde hair that was later matched to Zuzu using DNA. Some of her hair was also found in a shop vacuum that belonged to Robert's brother-in-law, which was used to clean the Ford F-150 he had borrowed that night. The following year, in April 2018, with overwhelming evidence against him, Estrada decided to come clean and take a plea deal. As for what happened to Zuzu, he said that Robert had admitted to choking her until she was dead. Investigators believe this occurred after she told him of her plans to transfer schools. Estrada also admitted to driving him to buy the drop cloths, which he ultimately paid for. However, he claimed he refused to help move the body, but according to investigators, the physical evidence showed otherwise. At his sentencing hearing, Zuzu's brother, Miles, gave a victim impact statement directly to Estrada, telling him that had he called the police instead of helping hide evidence, his sister would have been found sooner, and he might have remained a free man. Investigators believe Estrada was the one who disposed of the bedding, based on his cell phone data that showed him visiting various commercial dumpsters in the area following her disappearance. In the end, he was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison and released in mid-2022. While Robert was awaiting trial, his cellmate, Roy Roman, came forward with a bombshell. He claimed that Robert would regularly cry at night and whisper, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you," essentially confessing to the crime in his sleep. He also allegedly expressed constant worry to Roman that his brother-in-law would also be charged because he had used his truck to move her body. In a crazy twist, he claimed that Robert admitted to killing Zuzu because she threatened to expose a bisexual relationship between him and Estrada. Estrada would later confirm this during his testimony and said that their sexual relationship had been a frequent source of conflict between Robert and Zuzu. After a long delay brought on by a venue change, his trial finally took place in May of 2019. On May 7th, as the guilty verdict was read, Robert shook his head in disagreement and shifted down in his seat. The following day, he was sentenced to life in prison for the murder charge and 20 years for the tampering charge. He'll be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. After Zuzu's murder, she was awarded her degree posthumously by Sul Ross State University in May of 2017.